Yes, Shadsidomem. Hi, this is Michael Aram. I'm here at our store in Florida. You know, when you're a designer who's been doing his same career for the last now 32 years that we created for the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide. You know, I always say, you know, every day you have to be better. You know, I'm so proud to be Armenian. I love meeting Armenians wherever I go, especially when I come to Glendale. It's a funny question because everyone wants to know what's your favorite piece, you know? And I always say it's like my children, they're all my favorites. We don't have favorites. I recently designed these pomegranate coasters, and you know, again, they're very small things, but they make me smile. In 1988, it was illegal for me to have a business there. It was illegal for me to work there. I'm now, of course, dealing with the aftermath of the war. My message for Armenians is that, you know, we are such an incredible culture. I think Armenians are survivors. Welcome to the Michael Aram store in Bell Harbor. Well, I think for all artists, it's so important to really always think about where you've come from and to really be connected to your roots. And certainly for me, with my work, it's something I think about all the time. You know, I am the grandson of genocide survivors who came to the United States, you know, in the early part of the 1900s and settled in Watertown, Massachusetts, which is a very strong Armenian enclave, and also Providence, Rhode Island, where again there were many Armenians who settled. So I'm from New England. It's where I was born and raised, and you know, really grew up there, but very connected to our culture because of the large community there. You know, it's funny because I always say with me that every day is the first day of my business. And I know we've now become a global lifestyle brand, and you know, thank goodness we're well known pretty much, you know, in the United States and around the world for the work we do. But you know, we really approach every single day as the new beginning. So to think of us as a brand is something I don't think about every day. I just think about how do we work in a way that's strong, successful. We do the best work we can. You know, for me, it's always putting the beauty of the product first, never the business first. It's always about how can we make the most beautiful thing we possibly can, and then the rest will follow. I had a art teacher, sort of mentor early in my career, who always said, you can't put the cart before the horse. You have to put the horse before the cart. And for me, the horse is, you know, making beautiful objects, making them the most beautiful that you can make, and to make things that come from your heart and are authentic to who you are. I grew up here in the United States and took my first trip to India in 1988 at age 25. And I went there to visit friends and to see the country. I always love traveling and always feel so inspired every time I interact with a new culture. And while I was there, I used to enjoy getting lost in the old city. I think one of the best things to do when you travel is to go away from the tourist spots. I know it's true when I've been to Armenia. You know, you want to see, of course, the important sites, but you want to also just get lost on the roads and villages and, you know, interact as much as you can with the authentic country. So for India, I would spend days, you know, going up the small roads and little lanes, and what I discovered were all these incredibly talented craftsmen who were making objects the way that I imagine they were made hundreds and hundreds of years ago. They were artisans who were making hand-bound books, and others that were hammering the big copper pots that they used for Indian weddings. Some craftsmen, were so humble. They were making very simple, very ordinary objects. I would spend the entire day going up and down these very small lanes, watching all these craftsmen doing their work. And what really touched me is that these incredibly talented craftspeople were so humble about their work, and the objects they were making were very simple objects. They were, buckets, shovels, scissors, large cooking pots that they would use for Indian weddings. But from my perspective, as an artist from New York City, what they were making was incredible. The only people I knew who made things were other artists. So when I approached them, with drawings and, with just gesticulations, I didn't speak a word of Hindi at that point. It was really with a great sense of respect for what they did. And it's what I call the sort of meeting of artist with artisan. And that has been the hallmark of our brand since the beginning. Of course, when I was there on that very first trip, I never had the idea that this would be a business, that this would be my career, that I would have lived in India now for almost 33 years. It was just out of a passion for making things and a fascination, for the making process. Even as a child, I loved making things. I always sort of made things in a way to understand the world around me, to understand my place in the world. My family used to make fun of me because I spent my entire childhood in the basement of our house making, dollhouse furniture for my sister, refinishing old furniture, making things out of wire, whatever I could, just to create. It was something that for me was always very important. And I love nature. My parents were very avid gardeners. We always had, beautiful trees and plants that we tended to growing up. My parents loved to cook and entertain. So I think all of those influences also, that love of entertaining, which I think is very Armenian, really, that sense of like harametzek, welcoming people into your home, treating your guests as if they're very respected, is something that's so important to our culture. I always say, and I really do mean this, that if you don't design something that's deep inside of you, that it doesn't feel authentic. I think people who look at your work, even if they don't understand what it is, somehow they can imagine it if what you're telling is true. There was a piece I very recently made, which was inspired by my first trip to Armenia in 1981. I was a student, and I went there with the ACYOA, which is an Armenian youth group, and we went and we stayed at the Vehapar's summer house outside of Yerevan. And I remember my first trip to Khorvirab, and of course all of us can relate as Armenians, that first time we went down the pit, right? A bit scary, but what an incredible moment that was for, I think, every single one of us who've been there, and I think most of us have been there, and how much that really stays with you and really inspires you. So I recently created a sculpture called Faith. And it is the story of Khorvirab, which is the story of the birth of Christianity, of course, in Armenia. And what I love is that Armenians see it, and of course, within 1 second, they know the story, they can relate to it, they recognize it. But what's so wonderful for me is that we put it on our website, we sell it in our store, and it gives us an opportunity to talk about our culture. And by calling it just Faith, it lets people dream also about what's important to them spiritually and their own journey. And of course, for me, not that we always want to educate, but it's nice when you can have an opportunity to tell your story through art. One of the favorite things I've ever, favorite's not the right word, but certainly one of the pieces, and I never say I'm proud of my work because I don't think that's a nice word to use, but one of the things that was most important and most meaningful for me, I think, was the migration sculpture that we created for the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide. I get emotional even talking about it, but that was a piece that was incredibly personal for me, but also a story that we all share. And what was so fascinating for me is it's a public sculpture. It's, you know, in New York City, in the midtown of New York City. And I'll be there, and there'll be Japanese tourists who are there taking pictures of it. And I'll talk to them, and they'll say that they have their own associations with the idea of migration and displacement and what they've been through as a culture. I'll meet, you know, people from anywhere in the world looking at that, and they take their own meaning from it. They might understand it, they may not know my story, but they'll look at it and it suggests something to them through the piece, which was the whole idea for me. I think telling stories through art is a beautiful way to do it, because people can get their own meaning from things. It's a funny question, because everyone wants to know what's your favorite piece, you know. And I always say it's like my children, they're all my favorites. We don't have favorites, but there are pieces that for me have had a lot of meaning, also because of the time in my life that I made them. You know, I think that all of the pieces somehow capture memory for me. It can be a very silly piece, a really super silly piece. For example, the first piece I ever made, we still have it in the collection, is a simple shoehorn. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a very simple hand-forged shoehorn. But it was the first piece that I made with a craftsman on the roadside of Old Delhi. And he was a man who was making a cutting die for the soles of shoes. He was hand-forging the steel that would cut the bottom of the shoe shape, but he himself had no shoes. And he was working in a very narrow shop that was as wide as his shoulders, you know, heating the metal, pulling it out, forging it over and over again. And I thought it was really ironic that here's a man with no shoes making this very technical, very, very difficult piece that's really like a piece of machinery in such a humble way. And so I sat and designed a shoehorn because of the association between what he was making and where my imagination was going. So that piece, it's so silly, it's such a simple piece, but we still keep it in the collection because for me it has a lot of meaning. Also, as you know, I have young children, and there's two pieces I made when the kids were born. One was a double heart dish. So this is a piece. I mean, again, these are silly pieces. They're not important pieces in my collection, but they're pieces which for me are personal. And I always tell everybody who likes my work, whether you can afford a $90,000 necklace or a large sculpture piece or something that's a more modest piece, you know, for me it has as much meaning. So when you say what's my favorite piece, it's not the I love the $90,000 necklaces, but you know, they're pieces that have associations and meaning for me. So when my children were born, they're twins, Annabelle and Thaddeus, I made a birth announcement to send to all my dear friends and family announcing the children's birth. And I made these double hearts and I welded them together so that it would tell the story of the twins with a very simple message, just saying twice blessed, because I was so blessed, of course, to have the kids. And then what happens after you have children is you only want to put photos of your kids everywhere around the house. And I always say, oh, I'm not a heart person. I'm not someone who loves designing hearts. It sounds silly, you know, I don't know. I'm a big guy, to do hearts is funny. But then when my kids were born, all I wanted to do was make hearts. And what I love about this piece is that each of the hearts is hand forged. And each one is unique. And I always say, just like our love, there's no two ever the same. And just like our frames, there's no two hearts ever the same. So for me, it speaks of those unique relationships that we have, whether it's with your children, whether it's with your spouse, your parents. It's such a unique love every single time with every single person that I love that our, oops, it's upside down. I love that our hearts have that same sense of uniqueness where every single heart is different. Well, you know, pomegranates, of course, have so much meaning for us as a culture and for all of us personally. And I love the symbolism of abundance and life and just that great sense of giving and plenty that the pomegranate represents in our culture. The sense of life and in the fruit itself is so meaningful for all of us. And I love expanding that collection. Initially, it was a collection of just one piece. I had a a candle holder vase and the pomegranate. And for me, it was like, okay, I've made my pomegranate piece now. And then the more I started to make the pieces, the more I was excited by them. I recently designed these pomegranate coasters, and again, they're very small things, but they make me smile. I have one on my desk for my glass of water, and every day I use it, I smile. It also makes me think of jewelry a little bit, and the more and more I'm designing jewelry, the more inspired I am to make things which are more detailed, have a little bit more, I don't know, a little more refined feeling, I think, than some of my earlier work, which is what's so much fun, when you're a designer who's been doing, his same career for the last now 32 years. I always say, every day you have to be better. Every day you have to make things that are better than what you did before. And that's, for me, what gives me the most pleasure and makes me so excited about what I do, is to learn and to expand our language with our pieces, expand our categories, and to continue to create pieces that hopefully excite my customers as much as they excite me. Gosh, I don't know. I never think of myself as that. I mean, I'm just Michael. I never think of myself as like, I'll go shopping with the kids and they'll say, "Look, Daddy, Michael Aram." And I'm like, "Oh, yes." But I don't think of myself as the brand. I'm just Michael. I'm just Daddy. I'm just a friend. I'm just who I am. But, I mean, in terms of my work, I love what I do, and I have such passion for what I do. So for the rest of it, I don't focus on that. I don't think about that. If I do, I talk about Michael Aram, the brand, as something that's not me as the person. That's not who I am. I'm just Michael. I'm just that guy, and I'm just the guy who loves to do what he does. I often wonder that because when I started my company, I was making paintings and working in fine art before that, and it's just hard to know. Sometimes I think, oh, what would have happened had I not gone to India? Had I not taken that first trip? Had I stayed in New York City? Had I continued with my painting and working in fine art? What would my life be? It's hard to imagine. But at the same time, I've always been that person who doesn't get stuck on things. I like working, I like evolving, I like discovering things, I like learning things. And I think if one thing wasn't working, that I would have found not a course of least resistance in a way that's lazy or passive, but I think I would have been looking for the signs, looking for some message of something, of what I should be doing or where I should be going. So I don't think I would have been that person to have been stuck and unhappy, because I'm just not that, I'm not an unhappy person. I always like to be a happy and optimistic person. So I think I would have been fine, even if I had stayed in New York and not gone to India and not taken that first trip, and who knows what. I was with a dear friend of mine the other day at a museum, and we were looking at contemporary art, and I had that thought, like, oh, what would have happened? What would I have done? What would my work, I know I would have been making work, I would have been working with my hands, I would have been creating, but what would that have been instead of this? India has been amazing to me, though, I have to say. I always talk about India as a woman. I always say she's like a mother. Sometimes she can be very tough. Sometimes she can beat you up and really almost take you down to tears. It's not easy working in India. It's not easy, starting a company there. When I started my company in 1988, it was illegal for me to have a business there. It was illegal for me to work there. I couldn't even own a bank account in India. I did it because I was 25 years old and I didn't understand why I shouldn't do it. I had a passion and I followed it, but every sign was telling me not to do it. I couldn't own a company until 5 years later, when I could own 17%, and then 31%, and then 49%, and then 51%. And today we have over 270 craftsmen in our own workshop. We bought the land, we built the building, but that wasn't the case back then. But when you're 25 years old and starting a business and love what you do, those things are not obstacles. So I found my way there. But certainly for me, India has been very rewarding. I have most of my adult friendships there. My workshop is there, which is, I don't know, it's my happy place. And when people talk about, where do you work? Where's your inspiration from? It always happens for me in the workshop, working side by side with the craftsmen. Yeah, I think it's hard for us to even talk about it. I don't know. I mean, it's been so difficult, I think, for all of us to process, to come to terms. Now, of course, dealing with the aftermath of the war, with the wounded soldiers, it's very difficult for all of us and really hard to ignore, but also hard to process at the same time. I think collectively we're all going through this great sense of mourning for, certainly for the soldiers, for the families, but as we've been through so much in history, as I think Armenians are survivors, right? I think we're taught that by our families, that we persevere, we survive, and maybe, I don't know, I mean, we always try to stay optimistic and say, we get stronger, and we're so together always. So hopefully this will be something also that will make us stronger and maybe teach us something. And I don't know, it's a hard thing though. We don't have the answers right now. My message for Armenians is that we are such an incredible culture and are such a strong and passionate culture that we always have to remember that strength that our ancestors gave us, that ability to persevere and to survive and to give all of our intelligence and all of our strength and all of our sort of spiritual power that we have over the generations to really be the best people we can be, the best country that we can be, and the best culture I think that we can be. I'm so proud to be Armenian, and I love meeting Armenians wherever I go, especially when I come to Glendale, when I travel anywhere in the world. I know as all Armenians, we seek out other Armenians to get to know and to be family with. I think us as Armenians, we always have that sense of family and being a big family. Yes, Shad Sidromem.